It's a true pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural Iranian Art Seminar Series. We are especially honored to begin with our first esteemed guest, Dr. Michael Chagnon, whose presence sets the tone for the conversation we hope to foster through this series. First, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We extend our warm thanks to our sponsors and supporters, in particular Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali for her generous support of the Institute, and Dr. Tawakkoli for his support for this initiative and for making it happen. And also my thanks goes to my colleagues, Dr. Chagnon and Dr. Belal Hashmi. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to remind everyone that we have other upcoming talks in the Iranian Art Seminar Series this fall. Please visit our website for more details and join our mailing list for the latest updates. Finally, a quick reminder about today's format. We will hold a Q&A session following the lecture, moderated by my colleague, Dr. Chagnon. We'll be taking questions both from the audience here and from our online participants. For those joining us virtually, please keep your mics muted during the talk. You will then be able to submit your questions in the chat or by using the raise hand button. Now, it is my greatest pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Chagnon, who for many of us living and working in Toronto truly needs no introduction. His research, his remarkable contribution at the Aga Khan Museum, and for some of us, his generous mentorship are already well known. But allow me to formally introduce him for the record. Dr. Chagnon is a specialist of painting and the arts of the book from the early modern Persian sphere. He has served as curator at the Aga Khan Museum since May 2019, where he has curated numerous acclaimed exhibitions, most recently Rumi, A Visual Journey Through the Life and Legacy of a Sufi Poet in 2023. He has previously held curatorial posts at the Brooklyn Museum, LACMA, and Japan Society, and has served in curatorial capacities for exhibitions at New York Historical Society and Asia Society Museum. In addition, he serves as assistant professor in the Departments of Art History and Near and Middle Eastern Civilization at the University of Toronto. Dr. Chagnon's recent publications include the exhibition catalog, Rumi, A Visual Journey Through the Life and Legacy of a Sufi Poet in 2023, and the peer-reviewed essays Reza Abbasi and the Embedded Image in 2024, Interpreting a Later Safavid Vase Between Material Object and Image in 2024, and Flirting with the Radical, Intertextuality, Intervisuality, and Gender Subversion in Manuscripts of Suzogodaz in the Journal of Material Cultures in the Muslim World in 2021. Dr. Chagnon received his PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University in 2015. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you so much, Foda, for that incredibly generous and lovely introduction. I'm so humbled by that. Thank you so much for organizing the Iranian Art Lecture here at the Iranian Art Center, the Elahé Mir-Djalali Iranian Art Center for Iranian Studies at U of T. Thank you very, very much to your co-organizers, Professor Tawakkoli and Professor Chagnon, and special thanks to Belal Hashmi as well for all sorts of support along the way. I also just really wanted to thank a number of people before we get started. Really helped me in this admittedly very preliminary research that I'll be presenting for the first time today. As the introduction indicated, I sort of lived more or less in the 17th century. And so this is me interloping into the late 15th, really for the first time. So I needed some guidance along the way, and I was very happy to receive it from generous colleagues, Denise Marie Thies at NYU Abu Dhabi, Simone Rete at the National Museum of Asian Art in Smithsonian Institution, Eleanor Sims, Nahlan Nasser at the Khalili collection, Jamie Kamstal Skip, Matt Nolan Kushki, my colleague at the Aga Khan Museum, Zoe Douglas Jankota, who's our collections manager, and very, very special thanks to Professor Maria Subtilny, who I had on the phone, I had on email, we had discussions, and so it's been extremely enlightening, this entire process. I'd also be remiss if I didn't just take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Sheila Canby, who is really was a mentor and a trusted confidant, who passed away last month, and she will be very, very much missed, and really set the bar at an incredibly astronomical level for curators and for those who study Persian art. So I offer this very humbly in her memory. So thank you very much to everyone. I wanted to just start with a little intro to say that this is a very preliminary research on a manuscript at the Aga Khan Museum. It came together rather quickly at a breakneck pace, starting really in July. And so I've been working on this for, I don't know, 5 weeks, not very long. And it's a manuscript that sort of sparked my curiosity because it's been on view at the Aga Khan Museum almost continuously since we opened in 2014. And so there's not been a lot of opportunities to take it out of the case, to examine it, to think about it. But recently we were able to do so and get some high-res photography done. And I've been writing a little catalog entry on it. And there was a lot of loose ends, let's say, in this manuscript that needed to be tied up. And so I wanted to devote a little bit of attention when I had a moment, and this seemed like a good opportunity. I wanted to focus on this work in particular because so many of you here today are students, and you're here at the U of T. And I wanted just to highlight the fact that you're in a city where there's a great concentration of minds, of collections, whether it's here at U of T itself, at the ROM, or at the Aga Khan Museum. And there's a ton of work. There's a ton of topics to work on. There's no end to the topics that need to be worked on. So you're really all extremely well placed, if this is, where your interests lie, to use the collections and use the resources here to dig into topics and really uncover and unearth some new information, which I hope I am beginning to do with this manuscript today, just as a sort of example. To that end, and then this is the end of my preamble. To that end, this is again preliminary. It's the beginning of the research. It's been a process of discovery. And so I want to present this lecture in a sort of way that I was uncovering what I was thinking about. This is not really a polished piece of publishable material quite yet. Maybe someday. But it's really more about, it's about a journey and a discovery. And so I want to take you on this journey of discovery with this manuscript. So I'll stop. So today I'll be speaking about an illustrated Shahnameh manuscript in the Aga Khan Museum with the session number AKM 269. It was first published by Anthony Welch in 1978 in the 4th volume of his catalog of the Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan collection. And since that time, it has been mentioned in a number of studies. On its final page, this is folio 613. On its final page, we have a colophon that records important details about the manuscript's production. It includes the year of completion, 898 Hijri, which is about the very end of 1492 to October 1493. It includes the scribe's name, and most strikingly, it includes the name, highlighted in gold right in the middle, of the dedicatee, Abul Nasr Qasim Khan, accompanied by the honorifics Sultan ibn Sultan ibn Sultan. Welch, unable to identify the seemingly royal figure, admitted, quote, "At this point, I've been unable to find clear indication of who this patron was or where he ruled." And subsequent scholarship has reiterated that, subsequent published studies have either reiterated that Qasim Khan remains unidentified or has avoided mentioning him altogether. The pictures of manuscripts 43 illustrations represent the height of what has been termed the quote commercial Turkman style. The origins and development of this pictorial idiom have been the subject of scholarly debate since Basil Robinson first defined it in the 1950s. What is generally accepted about it, however, is that the style crystallized in Shiraz by the 1480s and seems to have been practiced almost exclusively there through the 1490s up to the turn of the 16th century. This is a time when Shiraz was under the rule of the Apulian, like ethnically Turkman tribal confederation. So this is where we get the Turkman component of commercial Turkman. Robinson identified, Robinson identified the most recognizable features of the style, including stocky figures. And here we can see a rather thick-set Rostam shooting the eyes out of Ostaria into. We have stocky figures with disproportionately large heads and childlike faces, and you can see here, Zalin Rudadeh, they were basically like children. Oops. I'm sorry. Stocky figures, disproportionately large heads and childlike faces, formulaic renderings of vegetation, rocks, and trees. You get repeated from one illustration to the next. Landscapes, and you can see here comparing the two right-hand illustrations that alternate between either having a light-colored ground scattered with tufts of grass and stones. See that here. And dark green fields or hills tipped with lighter bushy forms. And you can see that behind this gentleman here. And an overall preference for bold expanses of bright, saturated color over line. In this sense, what Robinson described as a simplified style stands in deliberate contrast to the intricate spatial arrangements and psychologically nuanced figural interactions that define painting in Herat, the Timurid capital, in the same period. And I would also add contrast with pictorial styles, various pictorial styles that appear in manuscripts sponsored by Turkman patrons previously, before the 1480s. Another defining feature of manuscripts illustrated in the commercial Turkman style is the sheer scale of survival. More than 100 such volumes have been cataloged. Additionally, there's a recurrence not only of individual stock figures and motifs, but we also, as mentioned above, but we also have entire compositions that are repeated from one manuscript to the next of the same text. Here we have 3 illustrated Shahnamehs made right around the same time. The Aga Khan Museum manuscript is on the right. And we have an example also in the Bodleian and in the Bibliothèque Nationale. And this is a scene showing, of all things, the court of Guilmars, which is light years away from another version of the same scene that some may be familiar with. So we have those repetitions, but we also have migrating compositions, meaning compositions that are repeated across different texts. So where we see a composition like Afrasiab fleeing across the sea in the Shahnameh in the Aga Khan Museum, I think it actually appears first in a Hamse of Amir Khosrow-Dehlavi that's in the Topkapi and was illustrated by Barbara Brandt in 2000. So it's not only in the same illustrations of the same scene in the same text, but also migrating illustrations across different texts. Such repetitions, coupled with the fact that so few of the manuscripts record a named patron, led Robinson to suggest that such volumes were effectively mass-produced, hence the label commercial. Here's the commercial element. What Robinson didn't mention until maybe many years later, and that has been the subject of increased attention, in really the past 20 years is that a number of manuscripts illustrated in the so-called commercial Turkman style, in fact, have been made, were owned at some point by royal patrons. We have a number of manuscripts that contain seals of royal patrons. We have internal documentation claiming royal status for the dedicatee, much like the Aga Khan Museum manuscript. So we really must begin to question this line, obviously, between commercial and non-commercial. What does it mean? Is this even a useful category? I'd also like to add here, and it's something I'm not going to get into, Phyllis Chaman and Zeren Tanende, 2002, published a groundbreaking study, I think following up on something that Robinson had written about identifying shrines, Sufi shrines, Sufi convents, as a site of production in Shiraz. There's evidence from the 1490s, I think at least 2 manuscripts that mention that they were produced in a Sufi convent, and then later there's a number of manuscripts from the 16th century that mention this. So the assumption is perhaps that this was a site of commercial production. And it's a much more complicated topic, which I don't have time to get into, but very fascinating, happy to discuss in the Q&A. Against this background, it's perhaps surprising then that the identity of AKM 269, the apparently royal dedicatee, Qasim Khan, has attracted so little scholarly attention. Resolving his identity, establishing it firmly, is more than just a matter of filling a biographical gap. In solidly establishing who he was, we can approach a fuller and more nuanced understanding of the manuscript's significance, while potentially enriching our knowledge of the broader corpus of commercial Turkman production, and possibly ultimately lead to additional insights. Now, the manuscript, just basic information, measures about 30 by 18 centimeters. It is a medium-sized manuscript containing 613 folios and 2 flyleaves, one at the front, one at the back. Today, it is housed in the 19th century lacquer binding that we see here, suggesting that at some point it was rebound, probably during the Qajar era. This is supported by the fact that a flyleaf at the beginning contains seals and library notes of later owners, including mention of its presence in the Qajar library as of 1913 before being given to Assam Bey, the Ottoman ambassador. This flyleaf is followed by an illuminated double page framing the opening verses of Ferdowsi's epic. In other words, the manuscript does not include illuminated shamses with a dedication to owner, a potential owner, nor does it open with any preface, so not the bisymbolic preface. We launch right into the Shahnameh. It's possible that there were pages in the beginning of the manuscript that had been removed or were lost in the process of rebinding. We don't know. I don't think we've been able to dig deeply enough physically, really, into the manuscript to see if there's any evidence of that. It's been rebound. There's entirely new stitching, so it's a little bit difficult to see. The text is deposed extremely regularly throughout in 21 lines across 4 columns per page. At the traditional halfway point through the text, at the end of the reign of K. Khosrow, there's a short colophon dating the completion of the first book to the 3rd Shawwal, 897, which is 7 August 1492, 4 days after Columbus launched from Spain, followed by an illuminated chapter heading, marking the start of the reign of Lohras. Aside from the illustrations, there's minimal decoration throughout the manuscript, limited to section rubrics set against illuminations of fine scrolls. We see an example here. The overall sense of orderliness is underscored by the illustrations, which occupy anywhere between 1/2 to 3/4 of the height of their respective pages. At the very beginning of the manuscript through the first half, they occur almost exactly every 10 folios. That's extremely regular. And that is only really disrupted when the need arises. For example, like you need to have a scene of Rustam slicing the leg off the white deeve. It's not a Shahnameh without. You can't do without that. So that just shows up when as necessary. But otherwise, it's really quite regular. It begins to fall apart a little bit in the second half. I'll say that the irregular with the orderliness in that sense. The illustrations are usually contained entirely within the text block, although there are a few irregularly shaped illustrations that spill out into the margins. However, these are framed by the Jadwal rulings. Here's another example of we're going a little crazy with that. The sea serpent on the left spilling out into the margin ever so slightly. The final page opening here is distinct. It's a double page opening where the verses alternate between two lines of horizontal text and one line having individual verses disposed along the diagonal and framed within Vinespo illuminations. We see a similar arrangement on that on the halfway point on the colophon, that first colophon page, but this is being a double page spread. It's quite straight. The manuscript's second colophon occupies the final 5 lines of the last page. It's on the left, with gold applied to the interstitial space between each line. There's a good amount of water damage on the final folio, as you can see. This is not unusual. Usually the front and back of manuscripts can have the most wear and tear, the most handled, so it's not unusual to see this. In any event, the text of the last colophon at the end of the manuscript reads, "By divine favors and royal bounties, the transcription of this royal book, which is titled Shahnameh, has been completed. It is hoped that its conclusion is auspicious to the one with the fortune of complete happiness, the Hosro of youthful fortune, the one who has the dignity of Jamshid and the station of Feridun, the cypress in the garden of justice and beneficence, the one worthy of the Pahlavi diadem encircling the crown upon the royal head." There's like 3 words for crown there. "The Sultan, son of the Sultan, son of the Sultan, the light of sovereignty, truth, and religion, Abul Nasr Qasim Khan. May God perpetuate the shadow of his majesty and prolong the flow of his favors upon the 2 world. And may his fortune be ever increasing until the appointed day of rest, and God is the deliverer of what is sought." This is a very interesting phrase that I haven't been able to quite decipher. Professor Soptony has helped me quite a bit. Wallah muballigh al-muwas.
You translate it.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, good.
God fulfills
what has been asked for.
Yeah.
Penned by the servant Naim al-Din al-Khatib al-Shirazi in the months of the year 898. Again, that's November 1492 to October 1493. This rather elaborate text contains a wealth of information about the circumstances surrounding the manuscript's production. Giving the year of the text's completion as 898, the scribe's name, Naim al-Din al-Khatib al-Shirazi. AKM 269 is thus one of the numerous examples of manuscripts illustrated in the commercial Turkman style that was transcribed by a calligrapher with a Shirazi nesba, a major basis for the ascription of the style to Shiraz exclusively by past scholars. And of course, the colophon also contains the name of the dedicatee Qasim Khan and his kunya Abul Nasr, inscribed in gold in the middle of the while also stating that he is a sultan descended from at least 2 others of the same royal rank. To emphasize his status, the text of the colophon likens him to 3 of the legendary kings of the Shahnameh itself, Jamshid, Feridun, and Khosrow, while also offering metaphors that specifically underscore the Iranianness, for lack of a better word, of his rule, quite literally inscribing him into, or at least appending him onto, the lineage of Iranian kings immortalized in the text of the manuscript at hand. Notably, the colophon does not specify that the manuscript was ordered by Abul Nasr Qasim Khan, leaving open a range of scenarios for how and why he came into possession. Yes?
The PowerPoint has completely reversed all your phrases.
Uh-oh. That is a shame.
You must have
Yeah.
But it's all backwards.
Yeah.
And if which I don't wear my glasses for some reason, I would see that. Yeah, that's too bad. I cut and pasted it from my my Microsoft working document. Oh, well. I apologize to everyone.
We can read it.
Okay, we'll take care of that another. Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. I wouldn't have even.
We can read the original.
Yeah, no, I mean it's I can't see. I can't see the screen, so that's oh yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Oh yeah. Oh right.
Which will be current Pahlavi.
Yeah. Yes. Now, I don't want to dwell too long on the political history of 15th century Iran, but some context is essential. For much of the century, 15th century, what we might call Greater Iran, stretching from Iraq and Eastern Anatolia to Central Asia, was divided into Eastern and Western zones. This is, I'm painting with a very broad brush here. In the east, the Timurids controlled Central Asia, Eastern Iran, and Fars from about which is the southwestern province of Iran, from about 1400 until 1458. In the west, during the same period, smaller polities emerge and then fade from view, but two rival Turkman confederations predominated between roughly 1400 and 1460. The Karakum Black Sheep, who held sway over much of western Iran and Mesopotamia, especially after 1430, and the Aqoyunlu, the White Sheep, whose home base was the Diyarbakir region, and whose power spanned the Jazeera and Eastern Anatolia. By the end of the 1450s, Jahan Shah of the Aqoyunlu extended his authority deep into Iran. But in 1468, Ozan Hassan of the Aqoyunlu decisively defeated him, uniting most of Western Iran under Aqoyunlu rule. From then until about 1500, when the Safavids and Uzbeks rose to prominence, they came to power. They were already prominent. The region was effectively divided between the Aqoyunlu in the west and the Timurids in the east. So now a quick aside to layer in some art history. Against this political backdrop, the arts of the book flourished in several centers, though Shiraz often stands out as a particularly important site. Bibliophile princes are successively established there as governors, supporting nearly continuous, high-quality production. Among them are two of Timur's grandsons, Eskandar Sultan and Ibrahim Sultan, so respectively ruling in Shiraz 1409 to 14 and 1414 to 35. We have the Karakoyunlu prince Bir Budak from about 1455 to 60, who's the son of Jahan Shah, and the Aqoyunlu prince Sultan Khalil, 1471 to 78 in Shiraz. He is the son of Uzun Hassan. As these patrons moved from Shiraz or fell from power, the artists that they supported also relocated. So, for example, Eskandar Sultan's artists were taken to Herat in 1414, helping to sow seeds for the city to become and to emerge as a major center for manuscript production, while those linked with Sultan Khalil followed him to Tabriz after he succeeded his father, Uzun Hassan, to the Aqoyunlu Sultanate in 1478. Amidst all of this, it's important to note, here we go. It's important to note that in many instances, we have a practice of gifting books that has been reported as well, especially with the Aqoyunlu between father and son. So this is a practice of books being gifted from one royal to another, and we see numerous examples, or presume numerous examples about that. Just a couple examples of some of the paintings in the 15th century in various times. So we have manuscript Shahnameh made for Ibrahim Sultan, that's in the Bodleian, with this frontispiece illustration showing the prince himself in front, and a similar composition from a Diwan of Hidayat, Chester Beauty Library, that was made for Sultan Khalil the Aqoyunlu. So now, returning to the political situation and focusing specifically on the Aqoyunlu, whose history, their history can be divided into roughly three phases. The first phase includes their rise to prominence around Diyarbakir in the 1370s under the leadership of Kara Osman, head of the Bayandor clan, which will retain leadership over the other tribes in the Confederation. Over successive decades, the Aqoyunlu established themselves as a military and political force in the region through strategic, local, and international alliances. A system of power sharing within families and across tribes, however, often led to contested rule. One such struggle in the 1440s, I'm getting into some details here because I'm setting some stuff up for later. So I'm sorry if we're getting into the weeds, but stick with me. One such struggle in the 1440s involved Jahangir, a grandson of Kara Osman and supreme head of the Confederation, whose internal rivals supported a military challenge by Jahan Shah of the Karakoyunlu. Jahangir surrendered to the enemy in exchange for being able to keep his family fief in Mardin, or Mardin, as my Turkish friends remind me, Mardin, outside of Diyarbakir. His brother Uzun Hasan, however, was disgusted by this capitulation, and so retook the ceded territories and confined Jahangir to essentially house arrest in Mardin in 1458. Thus, the second phase of Aqoyunlu rule, marked by Uzun Hasan's reign and those of his immediate successors. This period is widely regarded as the Aqoyunlu apogee. A year after bringing an end to the Karakoyunlu in 1468, Uzun Hasan moved his capital from the ancestral power base of Diyarbakir to the metropolis of Tabriz, the former seat of the Elhanids and Mecca. He continued to expand territory until 1473, when he was defeated by the Ottomans at Bashkent. Upon his death in 1478, his son Sultan Khalil, we saw that manuscript by Sultan Khalil earlier, the erstwhile governor of Shiraz, briefly succeeded Uzun Hasan to the throne before being killed 6 months later by his brother Yaqub, in collusion with their mother, Sultan Seljuk Hanum. And I think that the story of Aqoyunlu women is one that really needs to be written because it's fascinating. Fascinating. Though initially relatively stable, Yaqub's reign ended with restiveness among Turkman tribal supporters as well as landowners, culminating with his mysterious death in 1490 and giving way to the third rule of Aqoyunlu rule, characterized by a decade and a half of factionalism and internecine warfare, with heads of powerful clans backing rival claimants to the throne. So this is an important moment, this third phase, starting right around 1490. At one point in the 1490s, Aqoyunlu rule was divided among three rulers, each in power over a particular slice of the territorial pie. Similarly, some provinces were ruled by non-Bayandur tribal governors as semi-autonomous states, a notable example being Fars, with its capital at Shiraz, governed since Sultan Khalil's departure in 1478 by the Portnak clan. So this, by the way, happens to overlap very nicely with the emergence and flourishing of the commercial style. So we have a moment of fractionalism, of fragmentation. We have Fars being ruled as a sort of semi-autonomous state at this time. And it's also the time that we begin to see almost exclusively this style being practiced, and a lot of books being made and so forth. With this historical context established, let's return to the evidence of the manuscript's illustrative style, that's AKM 269's illustrative style, and the colophon text to guide us in our search for the dedicatee's identity. Essentially, he's a ruler named Qasim, possibly linked with the Aqoyunlu in the late 15th century. In the course of my research, a review of the secondary literature, and particularly John Woods' pioneering study of the Aqoyunlu, reveals two possible candidates who are contemporaries. Qasim ibn Jahangir, one of the members of the Bayandur house, who vied for power in the third fragmented phase of Aqoyunlu rule, and he was situated in Diyarbakir, and Qasim Beg ibn Mansur Beg of the Portnak clan, who ruled Shiraz as a semi-autonomous fief. Now, I don't know where Qasim Beg Portnak's candidacy is, upon first glance, compelling. In addition to his association with Shiraz, he's recorded as having been a patron of learning and the arts. The poet Ahli, who composed verses for members of the ruling Bayandur clan, also composed a panegyric praising Qasim Beg Portnak. The philosopher Mehbudi composed an introductory cosmological treatise called the Jam-i Giti-Yuma in Shiraz in 897 1492, dedicating it to Qasim Beg Pornak, whom he characterizes as Ali Hazrat Shahzadeh Adlat Panah, the exalted prince, the refuge of justice. And Mehbudi implies Qasim Beg Pornak held regular majlises which he would sometimes attend. So in brief, with his Shiraz connection, his literary activities, and elevated titulature, Qasim Beg Pornak would appear to be a viable candidate. Counting against him, however, is the fact that he did not assume the governorship until his father's demise in the year 900, 1494, while the colophon of AKM 269 plainly states that its dedicatee is a sultan, son of a sultan, son of a sultan. Writing the same year that AKM 269 was being completed, Mehbudi's characterization of Qasim Beg Pornak as Shahzadeh, not Shah, not Sultan, may be relevant and not just rhetorical in this light. An additional, though somewhat circumstantial point, and this is something I'd never encountered until I read this study by Barbara Brand in 2003, which I have to admit I never sat down and read before, but I sat down and read it. The art historian Barbara Brand has noted that calligraphers would not use their nisbas if producing work for a local patron, as this would be unnecessary. And yet Naim al-Din, the calligrapher of AKM 269, signs himself as al-Khatib al-Shirazi, which according to Brand's proposition would not have done for a Shirazi patron like Qasim Beg Pornak. So I don't know. I want to look more at that because that's something I'd never really thought much about, and I think is really compelling and has lots of applications potentially. So now let's turn to the other candidate, Qasim ibn Jahangir. As a member of the ruling Bayandor family, there's perhaps a bit more recorded about his life than the Pornak who shares his name. According to Woods, Qasim bin Jahangir was born sometime before 873 or 1469. His father was none other than the famous Jahangir ibn Ali, the Aqimlu Sultan, who surrendered to Jahan Shah, the enemy, in 1450. His mother was Shah Sultan Hanum, a daughter of an early Aqimlu governor of Mardin, and later the chief ruler of the Aqim, someone named Hamza. Hamza, in turn, was the son of Kara Osman, who was widely seen as the progenitor, the first Aqimlu leader. Which is to say that Qasim bin Jahangir is descended from rulers on both sides. He first emerges in the period chronicles as partaking in a revolt against the rising power of Sultan Khalil around 882, 1477, or 883, 1487. Qasim's brother, Murad, had just attempted to revolt in Tabriz against Sultan Khalil, but he was forced to flee. I want to point out here that I'm going to give a lot of alternate dates because the sources, if you're familiar, they're not consistent. We get different dates. And actually, this leads to a bit of a problem, as we'll see in a moment. But it's good to keep in mind that one set of sources will give one set of dates and another will give another. And we need to sort of resolve these sometimes. At the same time, Qasim and his brother Ibrahim, both governors in the Kerman region, marched into Fars to confront Sultan Khalil's son and successor to the Shiraz governorship, Al-Vand. Qasim and Ibrahim expected to meet up with Murad, their brother, in Iraq to join forces, but Murad was captured and executed, and Ibrahim was captured and imprisoned. Qasim alone appears to have escaped. He appears to have inherited his father's governorship in Mardin sometime after the latter's death in 1469, and this is based on inscriptions and buildings in that city that date to the late 1470s. And this is Minorsky quoting Sayyid Haqi, the date of madrasa, which is 884, 1479. It may be based on a now lost foundation inscription. And I'll get back to that madrasa in a second. Qasim then reappears in the chronicles, though the dates are somewhat inconsistent from one source to the next. So sometime either in 897 or 898 or 899, so somewhere in a span between 1491 and 1494, Qasim was enlisted by Rostam ibn Maksud ibn Uzn Hassan, a pretender who just assumed the Tabriz throne, to battle a certain Nur-Ali Bayandur, a distant relative, who opposed Rustam's rule and supplanted Rustam's governor in Diyarbakir. The reason why Qasim was selected to do this is not given, but we can assume that it's because, as suggested above, that he was already a governor of the family fief in nearby Mardin. Qasim appears to have approached Diyarbakir via Hessen Cave and successfully driven Nur-Ali into exile in Mamluk Egypt, assuming the governor of Diyarbakir for himself. In 904, 1498-9, Yassan al-Tawarik records that Qasim, ruling from Diyarbakir, supported his former family enemy, Al-Band, who had a claim to the throne. And in the year 1501-02, I'm using some lines here, sorry. 1501-02, he's listed as one of 12 pretenders to the throne. And finally, in 1504-05, the year 910, he's reported to have been killed at Mardin by none other than Al-Band himself. So Al-Band and he have quite a on-again, off-again, we'll say, relationship. So this Qasim ibn Jahangir was in fact a minor ruler during the fractured third phase of Akoyunlu rule, descended from sultans through both parents, which largely matches the description of the dedicatee of 1490 sons. As noted above, he also appears to have been an active patron, albeit of architecture. In Mardin, most notably, he commissioned a celebrated madrasa that still bears his name, possibly dating to the late 1880s, 1479. This example is especially significant as it's the only known instance of its kind associated with an Akoyunlu patron in Anatolia. Notably, an illuminated copy of the Musnad of Abu Hanifa, now in the Çorlulu Ali Pasha Library, is reported to have been made for this madrasa's library. Although the date of that manuscript is not recorded in the Çorlulu Ali Pasha Library catalog of the 1880s, and therefore cannot as yet be directly tied to Qasim Khan's personal patronage, it nonetheless demonstrates that the madrasa possessed a function in library, raising the possibility that Qasim's patronage extended to books as well. Qasim Khan is also credited with commissioning a covered market of Bedistan in Mardin, as well as two mosques in Diyarbakir around the year 50. Sheikh Antar Mosque and the Aini Minaret Mosque, both in Diyarbakir. So despite all of this, there are two sets of challenges that potentially undermine Qasim ibn Jahangir's identity as the patron of the 1493 Shahnameh in Toronto. The first is that the nomenclature ascribed to the dedicatee of AKM 269 does not, upon first glance, comport with that typically used by or associated with Qasim ibn Jahangir. For example, the primary sources most often ascribe the kunya Abul Muzaffar to Jahangir, not Abul Nasr. Abul Muzaffar is used, for example, in a Suyurgal that Qasim issued in 903, 1498, and that was published by Minorski in 1939. Since the colophon of AKM 269 calls its dedicatee Qasim Khan, similarly, I should say, the colophon of the manuscript calls Qasim Khan a Khan, not, as Maria subtilely has noted to me, as one might suspect, a title like Beg or Bey, which is how Akoyunlu rulers are often referenced in some sources. These discrepancies raised my suspicions. However, a review of the numismatic evidence for Qasim ibn Jahangir's reign helped resolve these issues. So as a side note, there are few good images of coins issued by Qasim, believe it or not. And here, I know it's shocking. And here I'm showing one that has a very typical feature, which has the personal name surrounded by a polylobed or square device in the center, surrounded by honorific titles like Al-Sultan al-Adil. However, there are a wider variety of forms recorded textually in numismatic catalogs, though these lack images. So with regard to the coin, Tawhid lists a nisfiya, or a half-value coin, in his 1903 catalog for the Humayun Museum in Istanbul, giving Qasim's kunya as Abu Nasr. This suggests that Qasim appears to have used different kunyas through his reign. Rabino de Borgamali corroborates this point in his 1950 study on Jalairid and Turkman coins, based on the principal collections around the world. So that Qasim used two different kunyas. Similarly, Stanley Lane Poole, in his catalog of the British Museum's Islamic coins, lists a silver coin which names Qasim bin Jahangir as Qasim Khan, not Qasim Bey, similar to the example shown here. And here we can see Q-A-S-M, Qasim, and then Khan is here. So we have the name along this line. And then Al-Muzaffar, and may God extend his rule, etc., etc. The second set of issues mitigating against Qasim bin Jahangir, however, relates to the potential misalignment in the dates of the colophon with those in the chronicles. As will be recalled, the first colophon of the manuscript is dated 3 Shawwal 897, August 1492, while the second provides the year 898, between November 1492 and October 1493. This span of time seems to overlap with Qasim bin Jahangir's defeat of Nur Ali Bayandor in Diyarbakir. However, the sources disagree on the precise date, 897, 898, 899. For a local Syriac historical chronicle, actually, it's a Zayl, it's an extension of the chronicle of Bar Hebreus, which gives the Greek year of 1804, which Minorski miscalculates, but it does equals 1492-93. So according to this Syriac local historical chronicle, the year that this occurs is 898 or 1492. The discrepancy in these sources is a point underscored by John Woods in a footnote, who disagrees with Minorski's reliance on the Syriac chronicle and instead prefers the later date, which is repeated in several Persian language sources. Clarity around the date, however, may have implications for our understanding of the manuscript. So once again, one has to turn to the numismatic evidence to possibly help resolve the matter. And so Rabino de Borgamali lists among the silver coins bearing Qasim's name an example dated 897, 1491-92, and minted in Hisn Kaifa. This numismatic evidence appears to corroborate the earlier date provided by the Syriac chronicle, and which I also believe uniquely provides the Syriac chronicle uniquely provides the detail that at the time of the incursion into Diyarbakir, Qasim also took possession of Hisn Kaifa. So in other words, the same year that Qasim appears, according to the numismatic evidence, to be the recognized governor of both Diyarbakir and Hisn Kaifa, in addition to Mardin, work commences on a Shahnameh that would become dedicated to him the following year. Incidentally, the scribe of the manuscript, Naim al-Din al-Khatib al-Shirazi, was also responsible for transcribing manuscripts made for or gifted to other members of the Akbayun royal line, including a Nezami bearing the seal of the Prince Masih, now in the Al-Sabah collection, copy of the Hamzeh of Amir Khosrow dedicated to Yaqub, and a second Shahnameh, today in the Khalili collection, MSS 713, which is also illustrated in the commercial Turkman style, and, as Eleanor Sims has recently published, bears a final colophon dated 1485-86, dedicated to Bayzangor, the son of Sultan Yaqub and the grandson of Ozan Hassan. Notably, both the format and the wording of the Khalili Shahnameh colophon are extremely comparable to the colophon of 269. And I can show you pictures later. In other words, Naim al-Din appears to have regularly produced manuscripts for members of the ruling house of the Akbayun. Once again, more evidence that Qasim ibn Jahangir is the patron of or the owner of this manuscript. So, in conclusion, what I'd like to suggest is that the evidence points very much in favor of Qasim ibn Jahangir as the patron of AKM 269. Moreover, the coincidence of the manuscript's date of production and Qasim's seizure of power in Diyarbakir raises the possibility that the manuscript was produced as a gift, perhaps to commemorate his ascent to the governorship of Diyarbakir, Akbayun's ancestral homelands, potentially by someone who saw greater significance in this move amidst the extensive jockeying for supreme position in the fractured third phase of Akbayun. This lecture has suggested that AKM 269 is a significant addition to a growing body of evidence that manuscripts illustrated in the commercial Turkman style were deemed worthy enough to grace the library shelves of rulers, at times given as gifts to punctuate moments of personal and political importance. Beyond that, however, its internal documentation has helped bring clarity to inconsistencies in the historical record, bringing light to a confusing and fragmenting moment in Iranian history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. This is interesting and exciting on many levels. One of the levels is, as you say, this is a manuscript that we've seen a lot in the Aga Khan Museum, and it just highlights the way we take some manuscripts for granted. We see them, we've read about them in a sense, the earlier phase of research on Persian painting. We take some things for granted, and then we build on that. And what you've done here is you deconstructed a moment of research, an important research in identifying the commercial Turkman style and raising the question of the relationship under the upper window between production in Shiraz, production in the heartland in what's now Anatolia, in Mardin and Diyarbakir. And I think this is very interesting because also it begs the question of where do we go? And I think I'd like to take the prerogative of asking the first question of saying, then do we not take anything we've learned in the earlier phases, and by earlier I mean actually the 30s, not after that, of Persian painting? Do we question everything based on the cumulative knowledge that we have now and go back and check names and dates and provenance and styles, including something that we take for granted, commercial Turkmen style as in a
The question is, do we go back to earlier scholarship and do some revising? I think what's remarkable about this manuscript, aside from that it looks really good.
yes.
I think what's remarkable about this manuscript is that it invited a kind of research that is so, and just to use the term, so conservative. I don't think I've gone back to numismatic evidence since, I don't remember. I mean, but that kind of research, which is so basic, it's so essential to the methodology that we all learned back in the day. And it became incredibly relevant for understanding this thing. So I think we do look at the conclusions that have been drawn in the past, and we do this anyway. But what I think is interesting is that we can also use the tools that are very much associated with the past and find something very exciting. And that's exciting to me. I don't want to say it, but I suppose I'll say it. There's a lot of just the groundwork research that still remains to be done without having to, we need to do that before we can get to the theoretical frames, before we can get to the new ways of new methodological approaches. There's still a lot of utility in some of this very basic kind of work. And this manuscript is, I think, a fascinating example of that.
Thank you so much. We're going to take questions both from the room and from online. And I don't know if we have any questions. We don't. So you'll let me know if there is. Any questions, or should I ask another question to just... Let me ask you another question where people form their questions. I was fascinated by, this is a beautiful manuscript. And as you say, it is designed. It's very well designed. You've mentioned the frequency in which the paintings are in the first half of the manuscript. You've mentioned that there is 2 colophons towards the middle. It seems to me that first part that is very regular, very organized. Has there been any codicological work on the paper and the organization to see whether the 2 parts belong to the same production phase, or is what is the change telling us between the very regular and sort of the less organized second phase of it?
That's a really great question. And I think that's now on the list of, I'll put that on the list of research questions for the manuscript. One thing we know is that illustration rates become less and less regular as the Shahnameh manuscript sort of progresses. So, as it goes on, we start to see less, the illustration becomes more infrequent. So, you don't get a lot of scenes from the historical period that are illustrated and so forth. There's still understanding sort of the bigger picture, the contextual picture for this manuscript, I think will be really helpful for us to look at the pictorial program, plot program, and see if there's anything there. I keep bringing this image up because it's one of the very few, there's lots of enthronements in this manuscript, lots of murder and lots of enthronements.
They go together.
Well, very often. This is the one scene that shows an actual coronation to some extent, someone being handed a crown. And this is Dara being handed a crown. And it's actually a really interesting story. Anyway, it's an interesting story. I think this painting, there's something about this scene in general across Shahnameh manuscripts that should be looked at. It's not a very frequently illustrated scene, but I think in this manuscript, it might have particular significance because my hypothesis is that this manuscript was made to commemorate essentially an ascent to the throne. So are we looking at a potential surrogate portrait? This would not be unusual. This is something that does occur in Shiraz manuscripts of the 15th century. We know that. For example, and so on. So I think that there's a lot of questions to be had there. Interestingly, well, I'll leave that for another time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Professor Topoli?
Thank you, Michael, for your fascinating work and really serious ground, really redoing the groundwork for this project. What I find interesting is this, not intertextuality, but intervisuality and the movement of images from one text to the other. How frequent are they and how do you explain it?
Yeah, well, this is a pet interest, a major interest of mine. The idea of intervisuality is a major interest of mine. I have not thought, I've thought a bit about the potential for true intervisuality, meaningful intervisuality, beyond just sort of, we have a model, we're going to copy it. Is there a meaning behind that in this 15th century context, which is, raise that specter. Adamova wrote about repeated images in 15th century in a volume that I believe Professor Subtly edited in 1992. It's, I think, still an open question because if we're beginning to look again at commercial Turkman production, let's say, we're looking at 15th century, can we move beyond the model of utility? So the idea is, to answer your question, yes, there's a lot of repetition across repeated compositions. There's a lot of repeated compositions and more within the same text, let's say, like Shahnameh compositions repeated again and again, but also we get compositions shared between texts. So Iskandar or others at the Kaaba, for example, or, we saw this one with the boat and so on. There's one that, anyway, there are others. Is it meaningful? Are we going beyond the model? Like they're looking at the same models and then just repurposing them, or is there a meaningful connection being made between texts through the images? I think that for the 15th century, we're still in the utility mindset, but maybe we can begin to think outside the utility mindset. By the time you get to the 16th and the 17th century, I've written about this, others have written about it. It's certainly meaningful. There's a deliberate intention to call out an intertextual relationship using the visual as the cue. Yes.
Since you flirt with the radical, would you be so radical as to really reconsider using this term, which honestly, I think Turkish art historians in particular really take an exception to, because it's a pejorative value judgment, maybe just on the painting, but the text and the calligraphy is right up there.
Oh yeah,
it's first class. So I just was coined by, who was it, Robinson.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuck. But I think you're on the way to sort of, Lala Uluj, for example,
Yes.
I know feels very strongly
Yes.
about using that.
Yes, yes. Used here in air quotes entirely in the written form of my paper, and I think, absolutely. Aside from it being potentially a value judgment and pejorative, what is the utility? And this is what are we getting at here? Because
what does it explain?
What does it explain? And
Well, we have to see there was commerce.
Well, there's that.
Account books.
But then,
prices attached to these.
But if to that end, everything is commercial. I mean, these books didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were paid for, no matter who made them. So there's money involved, of course. So I don't think it's a useful term. I don't think it's a very descriptive term. I think it explains one corner of potentially something that was happening, but it does not encompass the totality. Should we reconsider it? There's a lot of things that we should probably reconsider for sure.
The century in Shiraz is something that I think was a very important discovery.
Yeah.
But if you look at Safavid production, many historical works were produced in Shiraz too.
Absolutely.
Why Shiraz? So it was always a center of production, but there's nothing particularly to tie it just to the Orient.
There's a lot of there's been a lot of good work in Turkey and elsewhere on Shiraz. Obviously, Elahé attendant. There's a lot of really good work, and thinking about a much more looking across time, over centuries at Shiraz production over a really long period, I think would be very helpful as well. Because what is this type of production, this massive type, there's a lot of survival, and this massive type of production doesn't come out of nowhere. There has to be some impulses, and seeing it over time, I think, would be really interesting. I know that a lot of people have worked on it. I think it's just a matter of putting the pieces together.
Just one final comment. I mean, all of these, including the places of production, but in particular the copies themselves, are very important manuscript witnesses.
Yeah.
So if we call them commercial, whatever, it's like discounting. Oh, let's not take it into account. But they are very important in terms of the history of it.
Yes.
It's also the number, because we have a huge number of them, relatively speaking. Yes. But again, I think that number may now need to be revisited and looked at more closely. Now that we say, for example, this manuscript was copied outside of Shiraz, if we want to follow Barbara Brand's argument that it's been, and therefore the use of the term Shirazi for the calligrapher. Maybe that huge number of 100 manuscripts can be.
I think also thinking about style, there's always this tacit comparison, let's say, to what's happening in Herat. I mean, I think that's just there lurking in the background because it's the 1480s. We have Sultan Hossein Baykara in Herat. We have all of that gorgeous painting being produced there. And I think, not that it's an unfair comparison, but can we look at this material, at this stylistically with different eyes, and see it as a sort of very innovative to some extent? It's conservative in a way. It's also really innovative. It's really flashy. These are very bright colors. It's very appealing. Is there a reason that this style is the way it is beyond it being less advanced or whatever? I think we need to look at it with different eyes.
But could it be that unique artistic aesthetic uniqueness of it contributes to the cycle of production and wide dissemination? So in a sense, the commercial is grounded on this aesthetic appeal that people want to reproduce it and
these are all great questions. I mean, again, I wish I knew more. I wish I had spent more than 5 weeks on this. But anyway, I think it's a really fascinating topic, and it's when you have manuscripts that are intact like this, that have a lot of their original components, it's really, really ripe for study. So I agree.
In the past says that was a good insightful, Michael. You can navigate your way through century. May I ask for the Barbara Branson citation in which she mentions scribes not using their mitzvahs when serving local patrons?
Yeah.
Is this a larger generalization or specific to native?
I have the sense that it was a more general statement. I have to go back. It's one of these things I took a note on. It's in the Perspectives on Persian Paintings book, and I believe, and if I'm wrong, then I feel really bad, but I believe that's where it is. I'll have a look at it, Jamie, and I will email you. I will email it to you because I have to go back to my copy, which is all marked up. But thank you for it really is an interesting insight. And I hope I'm not misattributing it. I'm pretty yeah. Okay.
Questions, comments?
Captive audience.
Yeah.
So I think we touched on this very briefly. That second column looks a little like maybe it was added later. And I wonder whether you could compare the first and the second, just to see how they look, and then consider possibilities.
Sure.
Do that.
I think we'll be looking at the handwriting. We had a technical analysis of that page, and the pigments are consistent. The ink is consistent. The gold is consistent. So meaning that it's not. What I was worried about was that the gold is covering something up underneath, but it's the same sort of layer of gold that's used in the interstitial in the columns of text above. So it's on like the same layer. This is my understanding, my minimal understanding of what Zoe Douglas Chinquota, whom explained to me. She said that page looks consistent. Whether it's consistent in terms of handwriting to the first colophon and things like that, certainly we need to have a look at. I am not an expert in handwriting.
But you've been doing numismatics, so been looking at it.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's a good
calligraphy.
But it's interesting because I have a picture and I can show you of the colophon of MSS 713 in the Khalili collection, which was made for Bicycle, the Aquaman prince, who was 5 when the film was completed. But colophon is really similar to the one that's in the AKM 269, both formally, just the form of it as a rectangle, these sort of illuminations in the corners, and the wording is, you just cut and paste, you just cut phrases and move them around. It's essentially the same. So I feel like this is almost a thing that came out of a workshop with which Naim was attached to, not himself composing it. Do they have in shop for these sorts of things? I imagine they might have models to draw on.
And also the picking up of the name and certain goals.
Yeah.
That's also another thing that we see later in very yes, but it would be interesting to look at it in that period as well.
Yeah.
Technical stuff.
Yes.
You watch that program Fake or Fortune?
I haven't had a TV since
My God,
2013.
It's produced by the BBC. It is amazing.
Well,
they take paintings that one thinks it's a Rembrandt, and they take it to the Courtauld Institute, where they examine the pigments, the composition, the dating. Were these pigments available at such and such a time? It's just amazing what they can do.
There was a pigment analysis, a dissertation written on this manuscript. It was a pigment analysis of it, and the long story short, I don't have the name. It was yes, it was maybe out of Hamburg. But if I recall, the long and the short of it, is the conclusion the author drew, was that pigments used in AKM 269 compared to manuscripts of having similar compositions and so forth, the pigments were really saturated. They were very complex. The compositions were complex and at a very, very high level. Thanks to the pigment. So again, thinking about this in the commercial, what does that mean when you can have these levels of even at the mineral level, really, you can change, you can modify. is this term? Well, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that, but I'll send you the dissertation. Yeah. Which I only came across. So it wasn't even in our TMS. So someone had conducted this study and
Scientific person.
yeah, I know.
Chemist.
Yeah.
I think we have a question.
Yes.
میتونم به فارسی بگم توی انگلیسی فقط شما ترجمه کنید ارتباط سکایی آقا قرمزی بعدش صفحه میکنید مثلا ارتباطش با آقا تشیع و سکایی مشخصه بگید تو گفتن
Can you
گفتن ارتباطش بین سکای آغاز تشیع میشه در ایران صفحه و سکای مشخصه
Okay.
He's looking for the connection between the coins from the
Right.
which is the giving of the Shiraz Shahnameh
Yeah.
and the coins of Moshe.
There's a book. There's a book on the Sekhaye of Turkman. So like you have, it was this whole study by someone, and it's a whole, anyway, it's a catalog of that specifically, and I can share it with you. And now I don't know there's a connection. I don't know, but that's the question. Yeah, I don't know anything about it. I honestly I'm just there for the basic information. The basic information on the coin. I don't know anything about numismatics, honestly.
I have a question? Ahmad Nabi Tavallahi asked, the Orientalist Sir Harford Jones in his treatment of the last days of Lutari Khanizan refers to his minister's precious library preserved by Aga Muhammad Khan Khwaja. I'm curious to know if this Shahnameh was among the minister's books.
That would be very interesting to know. There are a number of seal impressions on the first flyleaf that need to be read still, and a number of them have been effaced. And there's an effaced seal impression on the colophon page, which I never noticed before. So we'll go back. Look, I think this right here is an effaced seal impression, and it's scratched from the first layers of paper are scratched off. The only reason you know that is that you have ghosting of the seal impression on the facing page.
If you did infrared spectrum.
I know. You're telling me. No, but it's there's a seal here as well. So there's been numerous owners. Some of them didn't want to, later owners didn't want the previous owners to be known. This is sort of a thing that happens. There's, I think, 3 smaller ownership seals, 1 large ownership seal on the flyleaf, and then 2 or 3 that have been effaced. So I think one has to look as exactly as Professor Subtilly said. You have to look at using UV and using infrared. Doing some kind of light spectrometry. You can actually see. Potentially, you can see what these say. The other thing you can do, there's if we can read some lines here on the ghosted image, you just need a high res to sort of just need to gutsy it up a bit, enhance it a bit, and then do a mirror reverse, and then you'll be able to read it. So I think that we have technology that we can do that.
And we have technology here at the University of Toronto, so that would be a partnership.
This is now on the docket for technical analysis at the museum. So we're going to see what we can do with that. But these are all really great.
I mean, they can read now. Scrolls.
Yeah.
They're being pulverized.
Yes. That are singed. They're delicate. And yeah. Yes. These were some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah.
So the stuff from Vesuvius, from
Pompeii. So yeah, this manuscript is an endless basket of delights, we'll say. There's a lot to be studied here.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for sharing this basket of delights with us and for starting us off with this Iranian art series. This was actually quite important because you look at something and you think you know it, and giving us a whole new layer and sort of new questions to look at. I'd like you all to share with me thanking Michael. And I would like to remind you that the next talk in the Iranian art series is Dr. Keelan Overton, who's coming on September 23rd. Actually, this is a Zoom lecture. And it will be on the Imamzadeh Yahya at Varamin. This is a new online exhibition and source on the Imamzadeh Yahya at Varamin. And I would love to see you all there. Thank you, Michael. And we look forward to